Well, welcome to the Ministry of Grace Bible study on the book of Revelation. This week we are in chapter 13. Now, let's go back a little bit and talk about what happened in chapter 12. Do anybody here remember any of the things that happened in chapter 12 without looking? The woman and the dragon. And the woman represented who? Israel. And who did the dragon represent? Satan, right. And we also read about a war in heaven last week, right?
Yes.
That was between Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels. And Michael won and Satan gets kicked out of heaven. And when does that occur? Mid-trib, right in the middle of the tribulation. So when you read your Ezekiel and your Isaiah and it talks about Satan having been already kicked out, he hasn't. He is there right now. He is accusing us every day. Every time we do something wrong, he accuses us, and our defense attorney shows his blood and says, innocent. Right. Okay. Revelation 13:1. It starts off with, and he stood upon the sand of the sea. That, in some translations, it's at the end of chapter 12. In other translations, it's at the beginning of chapter 13. And it depends on which Greek text you take it from. I think this location is more appropriate based on the Greek text that I hold in highest regard. And who is the he that stood on the sand of the sea? Can you guess? What? The dragon. Okay, good. Now what does the sand represent?
I was just looking at the book without looking at the book.
You can look at the book now.
Because I'm good at that.
Sand is the Greek word Amman. In fact, the capital of Jordan is Amman. Okay? And it refers to sand like you would find on the beach. And it refers to an innumerable multitude. In fact, when God was promising Abraham descendants, he said in Genesis 32, "But you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." Okay, so sand usually refers to just a multitude of people. And he stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on his horns, and blasphemous names on its head. Okay, what does all that mean? Okay, well, let's...
You turn the page and explain it to me.
Oh, yeah? Well, then you can read it right out of the book. Okay. Okay, first of all, the word beast is the Greek word therion, which means a wild or dangerous beast, or it could mean a poisonous beast. For instance, a poisonous snake is referred to as a therion. Okay, this beast... And I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Most prophecy experts believe that the sea is a reference to the Gentile world, and that the land is a reference to Israel. Okay, so when he says he rose out of the sea, many interpreters see this as this beast is going to arise out of the Gentile world, non-Jewish. Okay? In Revelation 12, remember back there in the last chapter, we saw a description of Satan as the red dragon, right? And it said, "And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems." 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 diadems. Now, what does this chapter say? "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns, the same, 7 heads, the same, and 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its head. Okay, so the heads usually are seen as representing kingdoms and or kings. Okay, the horns definitely represent kings, and we'll get a lot into that here in just a minute. But it says it had 10 crowns on its horns. The word is diadem, the Greek diadema, which is a crown of royalty. It's an inherited crown. Whereas the crowns that we receive at the Bema seat are what? Yes, victory crowns, overcomers crowns. What? Stephanos. Yep. Good. All right. Also compare this description with what Daniel the prophet said in Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Okay? This is who Daniel refers to as the little horn. And it's important to understand this one. There were 10 horns, meaning there were 10 kings. And then there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. So these 10 horns represent the 10 nations that will form the confederacy that becomes the revived Roman Empire. He apparently was not one of the original 10 kings that made this union. And people thought that this was the European Common Market for a while, because there were 10 nations in it.
Okay.
But there are more than 10 now, and the number keeps changing.
Yeah.
So these are 10 kings that have banded together under the authority of the beast, the Antichrist, and a little one, a new one, comes up, and he destroys 3 of the kings. That's what it means. He plucks them up by the roots. Later in the same chapter of Daniel, he says, I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who will rise out of the earth. Now, Daniel was describing the 4 great kingdoms that have been in history. The first was Babylon, or Persia. The second one was Medo-Persia. The third one was Greece. And the fourth one was Rome. Okay?
I know that Greece and Rome are part of that.
Okay. These beasts are 4 kings who shall rise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive a kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head. And the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints, and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on the earth. which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. What's time, times, and half a time? 3.5 years. It's the second half of the tribulation.
I don't know if I missed this. I probably did. So it's the Great Fourth and so the
Well, the period that we refer to as the tribulation is 7 years. It's the period of time that the Antichrist makes a pact with Israel to protect them. It's 1 week, a week of years. Okay? And remember we talked about Daniel projected 70 weeks upon the people of Israel, and 69 of them have already passed. And the 70th week is the tribulation week. Half of that 7 is 3.5. So there's 3.5 in the first half of the tribulation and 3.5 in the second half. And the second half is known as the Great Tribulation. So Daniel is describing these 4 kingdoms, these 4 ruling countries, and this is the 4th one that he's just described here in Daniel 7. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, okay, and Daniel was one of his wise men. In fact, he was one of the magi of Nebuchadnezzar. And it's believed that the magi who came and visited Israel when Christ was born were going on truths that had been given to them by Daniel many, many years before. Okay? Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he went to his wise men and he said, I need you to interpret the dream. And they said, great, king, just tell us a dream and we'll interpret it for you. And he said, no, not so fast, guys. Here's his thinking. If I tell them the dream, they can come up with any explanation they want, and how do I know it's the real explanation? So he said, you guys have to tell me what the dream was, and then tell me what it meant. And the wise men said, nobody can do that. And so he said, okay, if you guys aren't going to do it, then I'm going to have your heads. So he gave the order to have all of the wise men killed. And Daniel was one of the wise men who hadn't been with him at the time. When he heard about this, he went immediately to the king and he said, time out, stop what you're doing. Nobody can interpret dreams except God. And my God will reveal it to me. So give me until tomorrow. I will go pray, and I will see if God will reveal this to me. So the next day he came back and told Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was, and then he explained what it meant. And that's why Daniel retained such a high position in Babylon. And here's his explanation. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This is a description of the dream itself. The image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That was the dream. So you can see why Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to tell him the dream, because if he told them that, they would come up with all kinds of wild things. Okay, who is the stone cut out without hands? The word translated stone is a Chaldean word, Aramaic word, because Daniel was written, most of it was written in Aramaic, whereas most of the rest of the Old Testament was in Hebrew. But it's the Aramaic word that is equivalent to the Hebrew word Selah. Remember that from Sunday's sermon? It's the rock. It's the same as the Greek word Petra. It's the huge cliff boulder rock, okay? So this was a rock cut out without hands, and which is Christ. And anyway, this was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Well, that would make Nebuchadnezzar puff up a little bit, wouldn't it? Another kingdom inferior to you shall rise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, yet as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. Okay, the kingdom, the head of gold represented the kingdom of Babylon. Okay, the middle of silver represented Medo-Persia. Okay, the brass legs represented Greece, and the feet and legs of iron and clay represented Rome. Okay. Now, the legs were of iron. That was the original Roman Empire. The feet of iron and clay is the revived Roman Empire that shall rise during the tribulation. Okay? So, this little horn of Daniel's will end up ruling over the revived Roman Empire, which are the 10 kings, 7 kings. Okay, the 7 heads of this beast, going back to the description of the beast out of the sea, are likely a reference to the 7 nations that make up this national confederacy. And after 3 kingdoms have been subdued by the little horn, the 10 horns of this beast indicate the 10 kings who make up the original confederacy, as evidenced by the 10 crowns on their head. So, John refers to this person as the Antichrist. And that's the expression that everybody knows about. You talk about the world ruler during the tribulation, everybody knows him as the Antichrist. But John is the only one who calls him that. Daniel refers to him, as we just read, as the little horn. He also refers to him later as the fierce king, or as the prince who is to come. Also in Daniel and in 2 Thessalonians, he's referred to as the man of sin and the lawless one. And then, of course, in 1 John 2:18, again, the Antichrist. Okay, so he's going to come to power. He may, in fact, be around in the first half of the tribulation, but it's during the second half that he's really going to be in power. Now, we also read way back here, back in verse 1, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. Heads, plural. So these kings that rule with the Antichrist are going to have some kind of name that probably indicates they are gods. Later on in Revelation chapter 17, we will read this. And he carried me away into a desert by the Spirit, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet-covered beast. This woman is the false church during the tribulation. Okay? She was sitting on a scarlet-colored beast, a red beast, probably the dragon, maybe not, filled with names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay? So this false religion during the time of the second half of the tribulation will be supported by the world rulers. Verse 2, and the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Now these 3 beastly characteristics, the leopard, the bear, and the lion, are 3 that Daniel used to describe the coming world empires. Only he described them as a lion, a bear, and a leopard, just in the opposite order. Because Daniel was looking into the future, John here was looking at history. So he saw them in the other order. Okay, the lion is Babylon. And if you've ever seen images of the walls and the buildings of Babylon, there are always lions lining the step. The lion was a symbol of Babylon. Medo-Persia was always viewed as a bear, very powerful. And Greece was viewed as a leopard, very fast. Okay? Now, if we read these descriptions by Daniel, here's how he said it. The first was like a lion and it had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. It was raised up on one side because it was made up of Media and Persia. That's why it was called the Medo-Persian Empire. And the Persian side of it was much more powerful. That's the image of this bear being raised up on one side. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Why is Greece pictured as having 4 heads? Remember, Greece was, who was it that was ruler of Greece when all this happened? Alexander the Great. Yes, he conquered the world when he was 20 years old. That's amazing. That is crazy. He conquered the world, and then just shortly thereafter, he died. And his kingdom was divided among 4 of his generals. Asia was ruled by Antigonus. Egypt was ruled by Ptolemy. Syria was ruled by Seleucus. And Macedonia, or Greece, was ruled by Cassander. Okay, so those were his 4 generals who had his kingdom divided up between them. Okay. And they said, and to the dragon, and to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. So this beast that this great kingdom of the tribulation is going to have the power and authority of Satan. Verse 3, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Okay, this beast, he had how many heads? 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. It does not say that he was killed. Some people have interpreted it that way because of the way the King James translated this passage. But it does not say that he had a mortal injury. It says he seemed to have had a mortal wound and was healed. And the whole earth marveled, and they followed the beast. So it's quite possible that the Antichrist, this beast, will have some kind of injury. It may in fact be from a sword, and it may in fact be to his head. And it will be the type of wound that should have killed him, but it won't. He will live through it. And people, yes, and people will wonder about him. A literal translation of that seemed to have a mortal wound is as if it had been wounded unto death. And remember, we've talked about be careful with similes, as if or like or whatever. They don't equate, they simply are similar. Okay? And the whole earth marveled. Now, if the beast, there are some that say that these heads just represent nations and not actual kings. If it had just been a nation that had a mortal wound and was healed, it wouldn't make sense. So I think it definitely refers to a person. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So the whole earth is going to follow the beast. Now that doesn't mean 100% of the people, and we'll cover that in just a second, but most of the earth. And they, the whole earth, worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? This worship of the beast is going to be happening particularly during the second half of the tribulation. One of the things that happens in the middle of the tribulation, and I don't know if it's in these notes or not, but the Antichrist will set himself up in the temple in Jerusalem. Remember, he will, at the beginning of tribulation, the 7-year period, he'll make a pact with them and let them start their sacrifices again. And in the middle of the week, he will stop the sacrifices, and he will set himself up in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. And the Apostle Paul, in 2 Thessalonians, said this, let no one deceive you in any way, for that day, and he's talking about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord starts with the tribulation. Some believe it starts with the second half of the tribulation. But the day of the Lord is a day of judgment and of vengeance from God. Okay? For that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and that's the Greek word apostasia. So some translations say the falling away comes first. And the man of lawlessness is revealed. That's the Antichrist. Okay? So he has to be revealed before the tribulation can happen. Let no one deceive you, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first. Now, some people believe the word rebellion, which, as I said, is the Greek word apostasia, which means falling away or moving away. Some people think that's a reference to the rapture. Okay? But the man of sin won't be revealed until after the rapture. So we won't know who the beast is. the Antichrist. The man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, and this is the temple in Jerusalem, proclaiming himself to be God. And what was it that Daniel talked about happening in the middle of the tribulation? He referred to it as the abomination of desolation. Okay? Which means that something anti-God will be set up in the temple. So that's probably this reference to the Antichrist setting himself up in the temple as God. He will also have an image of himself made and put in the temple. Spoiler alert. The false prophet will actually give breath to that image and cause it to come to life. And people will worship it. Yeah. Verse 5. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. How long is 42 months? 3.5 years. Yes. And that number keeps coming up again and again. So the Antichrist will rule during the second half of the tribulation. Okay? He will not rule during the first half, during the second half. So some things will happen during the first half that will bring him to power. And that's probably where he will overcome 3 of the other kings. I say probably because we really don't know. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. This beast is Satan's mouthpiece. He will speak for Satan on this earth. I do not think Satan indwells the beast. There is a demon, I believe, who will be indwelling the beast, and another one indwelling the false prophet.
Okay.
Okay?
And they all communicate.
If you think about this, Satan is a false God the Father. The beast is a false God the Son. And the false prophet is a false Holy Spirit. Okay, so it's a false trinity that exists during this time. Verse 7. Also it, referring to the beast, the little horn, the man of sin, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. This is one of the verses where those who believe in the post-tribulation rapture say, see, Christians will be here. It talks about the saints. The English word saint comes from the Greek word hagios, which means set apart. Okay? It literally means set apart for service of God. Set apart from common things to God's service. Okay? But there are some who believe that they see the word saint and they think, well, that must be the church he's talking about because we're called saints. But we're not the only saints.
Yeah, because there's still
Okay?
people who
People will believe during the tribulation. After the church is taken out of the way, people will believe, and many of them, probably most of them, will give their life for their belief. Because the beast and others are going to destroy anyone who is a believer in God. Okay? And we'll see evidence of that later on. Okay, so the beast will be able to make war against the saints, the people who do believe, and he will be allowed to conquer them, to overcome them, to kill them. This will be a time where those who are believers, will be in utter disbelief that God would allow this evil man to go ahead and destroy so many believers. But that will be the case. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. This will be the first true worldwide ruler. Okay? Look at some of the world rulers in the past, including the Caesars of Rome. They ruled over the Roman Empire, but not all the world was part of the Roman Empire. Okay? This guy will have the entire world as his rule. Let's look at Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 through 14. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude. Do you remember this when we went through chapter 7? That no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages. And remember what he just said here? And authority was given over every tribe and people and language and nation. From every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes. What do the white robes signify? Purity, cleanliness, yeah. Salvation. With palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, "Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come?" I said to him, "Sir, you know." John was so brilliant. He knew better than to try to answer that question. He just said, "You know, you tell me." And he said to me, "These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation." Notice he didn't say who came out. These are the ones coming out. So it's a continual process. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So these are the martyrs. And remember when we first saw the scene in the throne room of God, underneath the altar was martyrs, right? And what did he tell them? He said, wait a little longer until the rest of your brothers join you. Okay? Verse 8, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it, referring to the beast. Now, all who dwell on earth. The who dwell is the Greek word kataikuntes. Now, those are the permanent earth dwellers, right? That's what the kataikuntes means, those who dwell permanently. There's another word, skenuntas, which means those who are temporary dwellers, or tenting, or camping, or visiting, if you will. And we are referred to as temporary earth dwellers. But these are the permanent earth dwellers. And remember what that permanence means. Once they die, where do they go? To Hades. And Hades is where? In the middle of the earth. So those who don't believe are the permanent earth dwellers. When they die, they stay on earth. Okay, back to verse 8. And all who dwell on earth will worship it, the beast. Everyone whose name was not written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Those who are saved have our names written in the book of life of the Lamb. And our names were written before the foundation of the world, before God created the world. Our names were recorded there. Verse 9. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. And we know what that expression means. It means, listen up, folks. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. What the heck does that mean? Nobody knows for sure. But it appears that it is some kind of a coded message to the believers during the tribulation. Okay? And it may in fact be that those during the tribulation who are imprisoned are in a better place than those who aren't. because the ones that aren't in prison will be killed. And he says, anyone to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with a sword he must be slain. At the end of the tribulation, at the battle of Armageddon, when Christ comes and destroys the enemy, there are going to be some people left, aren't there? Maybe it's the ones who are in captivity. We don't know. Verse 11, then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. Now, there are some commentators who will tell you this one is the false lamb. But it does not say that it was like a lamb. Look at this carefully. It had 2 horns like a lamb. And the way the Greek is structured, it had 2 horns just like a lamb has. And incidentally, this is the word for a little lambkin.
So it's just those bumps.
When a male lamb is first born, there are 2 bumps where the horns will eventually grow. Okay, so that's one of the ways they can tell it's a male right away. Now, the word another beast, another is the word alas. We've talked about it before, which means another of the same kind. And it says, I saw another beast rising out of the earth. Remember, the first beast came up out of the sea. This one comes up out of the earth. Some prophecy experts believe that means that this false prophet will arise out of Israel, because they believe Israel is the land, the rest of the world, the Gentiles, of the sea. It had 2 horns like a lamb has, and it spoke like a dragon. This is the false prophet. Verse 12, it exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. Now, in the English, it sounds like a mortal wound is one that kills you, right? But it was whose wound of death was healed. He didn't die, his wound was healed. So the purpose of the false prophet is to make everybody on the earth worship the first beast. Verse 13. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, the permanent earth dwellers, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Okay, so this false prophet can perform miracles. And he will convince many because he can make fire come down out of heaven. I mean, if we saw somebody today who was able to call fire down out of heaven, we would think, we would sure have a lot of questions. Yeah. Verse 15. And it, again the false prophet, was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Okay, this image of the beast is the one that's set up in the temple, and it, the false prophet, causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. In fact, in the next verse, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 666. Somehow, people during the tribulation will be able to calculate the number. All, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. Let me give you a theory about this. this mark of the beast may not be a physical mark. Okay?
It's not like a tattoo. Or,
Right.
Okay.
Because it's not just the number 666. It could be the beast's name or the number of his name. Okay? It's possible that what this represents is like a credit card.
I got one of those.
Okay? And everyone would have one with their own number on it. Okay? And this one would be in the right hand, right? But if I didn't
Or
have it with me,
It's in your head.
you memorize it. And where is working memory in the brain?
Front of
It's in the forehead. Okay, so now we have the infamous mark of the beast that we don't know what it is. There's a lot of speculation. The truth of the matter is that people will not be able to buy or sell unless they receive the mark. I wonder how long that's going to go on. Is it just the last 30 days of the tribulation? Is it the whole second half? It's hard to believe that very many people could survive for 3.5 years without being able to purchase. We do know that at the end of the tribulation is the sheep and goat judgment. Remember, we've talked about that. And that's where he puts the sheep on one side and the goats on the other. And the goats, he says to them, "Depart from me into eternal fire." And the ones on his, the ones on his right are the sheep. And he says, "Enter into the kingdom prepared by my Father." Those are the ones that will go into the millennial kingdom.
So we know some survived.
We know that some will survive. Many of those will be Jews. And remember, the whole tribulation period is Daniel's 70th week. Okay? Who is Daniel speaking to and speaking of? Jews. Okay? So there will be a remnant. We're told that over and over in the Bible. Okay? We've had a lot of good questions here tonight. And we will come back to chapter 14 next time. There are a few chapters in Revelation that are as exciting as chapter 13, or is filled with weird
That's
things.
the longest it's taken us to get through.
Yeah. So, thanks for coming, and we will see you next week.